Alright, so picking up from where we left off, we've got our bust model, our base mesh loaded, and we're just going to play around with some of the tools and play around with the shape for a while before we start sculpting our bust. Alright, so again, the most important tool at this early stage is going to be our move brush, and I can affect the model uh, easier if I push it back a little bit with a larger brush. Okay, I've got my symmetry turned on, and I'm just going to start making adjustments here, pushing things in. And you'll notice that as I move around here and play with this, I'm constantly moving the model around, uh, never really being fixated in one area. And I can move the bust around and make adjustments at this low poly level. Okay, bringing some shoulders out, bringing the neck in a little bit. All right, bringing the chin out. Now, one thing I should note about this model, if I turn polyframe on, you'll notice that we've got some basic edge loops built right in. Let me change this material just so you can see it easier. All right, we've got eye loops, a nose loop, and ear loops put into this model. All right, so just be aware of those. This is the nose loop, not a mouth loop, as you might think. Kind of looks like it might be a mouth. All right. So again, I'm just using the move brush and pushing stuff around. I'm going to turn off polyframe while I work. Go back to my basic material. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and divide this model. Now you'll notice here in the subtool palette, I should mention that that's where our bust is right now. If we add eyes, if we add another layer, say of hair or whatever, each piece, each tool gets its own level here. Okay, each tool is a subtool. All right, so for right now, we've just got the one, and that's all we need. Okay, so I'm going to come down here. I'm going to divide the model. Again, I can hit the divide button, or I can hit Control D to divide that button, to divide that up. And again, I'm going to continue with my my move brush here. I can make my brush a little bit smaller, push some of this stuff in. Okay, pull some of this stuff out a bit. Okay, so at a certain point, I'm going to want to start adding more detail to this model. All right, and I'm going to use my clay brushes for that. So let me just push this in. And again, it's important to note how I constantly am moving around here. I'm making my bust a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger as I move around. Okay, constantly adjusting things as I go. All right, and it doesn't. You can see that it takes no time really before I start getting a basic looking head. All right, I'm going to divide this one more time by hitting Control D. All right, and now I'm going to go to my clay tubes brush. Clay tubes is kind of my favorite brush. Okay, and now if I go down in subdivision levels, let's go down to 1. You'll see I've got my clay tubes brush here, and it has really no effect, very little effect on this bust. All right. But if I hit D now, I've got 3 levels. If I hit D and go up 1, all right, now you can start to see that the clay tubes brush starts to have some effect. All right, and if I step up even one more by hitting D, now you can really start to see the effects of the clay tubes brush. All right, so the more polygons I have, the more effect some of these brushes are going to have. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and divide one more time by hitting Control D. All right, and now you can see that the clay tubes really does have some effect on this model. One important thing that we're going to use a lot is to smooth this stuff out. As we build our clay up, we're going to want to smooth it out. And to get to our smooth brush, all we have to do is hold Shift. All right. So if we hold Shift, you can see up here that changes. That's our smooth brush. All right. So we can smooth our model on the fly just by hitting Shift real quick. All right. So hold Shift down and hold it, and then we can smooth that out. Now the one thing to note about the smooth brush is that it always defaults to a Z intensity of 100. All right. So as I hold down Shift, you can see that jumps to 100. All right. So oftentimes a Z intensity of 100, especially for the smooth brush, is too strong. So we need to hold down Shift and adjust that down. And I like to go to around 30 or 40 in that neighborhood and kind of start there and see how that is affecting the model. So now when I smooth, it's less damaging to the model. All right. Now with the clay tubes brush and with almost all of these brushes, I would say except for the move brush, but for clay tubes, the clay brush, the standard brush, the pinch brush, holding down Alt, like if I were to paint some clay on here, I want to build up the cheekbones a little bit, okay? And then I'm going to hold down Shift and smooth them out, and then build them up a bit more, and then smooth them out. But if I want to cut away an area, I don't have to go to Z sub. All I have to do is hold down Alt. So if I hold down Alt with my clay tubes brush, I can dig away an area. Okay, so again I want to come in here and smooth that out a bit by holding down Shift, holding down Alt and digging away a little bit more, smoothing it out with Shift. Okay, I can come over here and hold down Alt and cut out some of this underneath here if I want. Okay, again I'm just holding down Alt and cutting away that, holding down Shift to smooth it out. Now the Shift brush, if I were to go up one more time in subdivision levels by hitting Control D, okay, it becomes more difficult to smooth. So if I've got my clay tubes there and I want to go ahead and add some clay, say to the cheeks here, and smooth that out, all right, I might have to adjust my smooth intensity a little higher to smooth that out a little bit better. All right. Oftentimes, if it doesn't smooth as well as you like, you can go Shift D, and you'll notice over here that Shift D knocks me down in subdivision levels, and then I can hold down Shift and smooth some more, all right, and then hit D and go back up. Okay, so smoothing is very important. We're going to use it constantly. All right, holding down Alt to cut out information, all right, is important. Sculpting is a subtractive process as well as an additive process. All right, so we're constantly going to be taking away and building up. All right, and what you just saw right there, I should point out that if Control Z, so if I cut something out and I don't like it, Control Z, just like in most other apps, will step back. Okay. So again, we build up form and shape with our clay brush. Now that's the clay tubes brush. The clay brush is very similar. It just has a softer technique to it, a softer feel. Okay. Again, still we want to smooth that out. I'm going to increase my smooth intensity when I hold Shift and come in here and smooth that out a little bit. And remember too that we're working with our pen and tablet, and our pen and tablet is pressure sensitive. All right, so you know, you can push harder on your pen, on your tablet to smooth a little bit faster, a little bit harder. All right. And just like with our other brushes, with the clay brush, I can hold down Alt and I can cut away areas. Okay. Again, it's just a little bit softer than the clay tubes brush. All right, and you can see how lumpy that is. All right, so I'm going to smooth that out, and you can see at this high, at level 5, it becomes a little bit hard to smooth that out. It still looks a little bit lumpy. So I'm going to go Control D, or sorry, Shift D to go down in subdivision levels, smooth it out a bit more, and then go back up by hitting D, okay? And that smooths out a little bit better. All right, so those are some of the basic tools we're going to be using. The clay tubes, the clay, the move brush, hitting Alt to cut away areas, and then using the clay tubes brush to build them back up. Going up and down in subdivision levels as needed. All right, starting with a low level to block out our basic shapes. All right, So starting with that low level, that's how we block our stuff out. It becomes very difficult if I go up to level 5 and I want to make fine adjustments. Now the move brush will still work just fine, you can see, all right? But for building out bigger forms, for shaping bigger forms, it's a lot easier to work with a lower subdivision level and affect all those polygons, okay, with the move brush. So again, my point is we go up and down with our subdivision levels as needed. All right, if we need to make big adjustments in the shape and form, it's easier to do at a lower subdivision level. Okay, and again, you can turn polyframe on now and then if you want and see how get some of these edge loops kind of lined up where you want them. All right, and we'll go over more of that as we start sculpting our bust. But you do want to make sure that your eye loops are where they belong and that your nose loop is where it belongs. Okay. And one more thing before we finish this video, I want to point out this local button here. All right. By default, that local button is turned on, and I'll show you what that does. If I start working on this shoulder over here, and I just start pulling that shoulder out, and now I rotate the model, okay, it's going to rotate around the last thing I touched. All right, so that shoulder was the last thing I touched, and that becomes the center that it pivots on. If I were to pull on this ear area over here and rotate, you can see that ear is now the pivot point. All right, and that happens with the local button turned on. Now what happens a lot of times, if I'm working on this shoulder and I turn the model around, before I know it, the model goes off screen. All right, and then I've got to hold Alt and push them back into the center. If I turn local off, that has no effect. Okay, it's going to rotate around pretty much wherever it is. So if I move it over here, it's going to rotate there. Doesn't matter what I touch. If I mess with this shoulder here, let me move it over. If I mess with this shoulder and rotate it, it's still going to rotate around the center of the model. All right. So I personally prefer to work with local turned off, but that will be a personal preference of yours. Okay, you'll just have to decide whether you like that or not. Okay, but I just wanted to point it out. In our next video, we're going to start setting up our Z project and bringing in our image plane and getting ready to sculpt our bust. All right, we'll see you in the next video.